My name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations. And today I'm going to be showing you how to make this beautiful wildflower detail on these socks. These are socks that were inspired by the movie The Princess Bride. This one in particular calls to mind her Buttercup's iconic red dress and her gold belt. And there are all these beautiful, what I think of as buttercups, but I will refer to them as wildflowers for this video. This is a super fun stitch pattern, and it only ever uses one color at a time. So you're not working with multiple strands at the same time. You're really just working these rows right here that are done in gold, but you use dip stitches to sort of create these flowers. So you dip from this row down into the previous garter stitch row, and then you get this really beautiful flower pattern that's really not that hard to work. So let's get started. Okay, as you can see here, I've already worked several of the sections. So you begin simply by making a garter stitch round here, which is 2 rounds, a knit round and a purl round. And then you're going to be working the wildflowers beginning on the next garter stitch set of rounds. So you begin with the knit round, and then you finish it off with the purl round. It takes 2 rounds to complete these stitches, because for the first round you create the increases, and then the second round you decrease them, and you also create that beautiful garter ridge. Now keep in mind that this sock has not been blocked. This one is on the needles and this one has, and this is a stitch pattern that you very much need to block. You need to use the water to relax the stitches so that you get them to be nice and even, just like you see in this final sock. Okay, so I'm ready to get started working round 7. So be sure that you're following your written instructions. Always follow those before the video tutorial, because sometimes the pattern gets edited, but it's much harder to do the video editing to make sure everything lines up. So always follow your written pattern. We're going to be working round 7. And let me tell you, I'm using double pointed needles to demonstrate this technique. However, you can use whatever sock needles you like to be using. I actually knit my sock with a 9-inch circular. That is my preferred method for working the leg of a sock. It takes a little while to get the hang of those tiny needles, the small circumference, but I feel like my socks fly off the needles because of them, and I don't have to work with adjusting stitches, which won't be a problem for this round, but it does become a problem with round 13, which I'll show you in a minute. All right, so before I begin working the gold, I always cross my main color over the gold or over the contrast color so that it'll lock that into place. I'm going to begin here, and the pattern tells me to knit 1 and then work the wildflower. So I knit 1 stitch, and be careful not to pull this yarn too tightly, because I have carried it up the inside of the sock, and I'll show you more about that in just a minute as well. Okay, so we're ready to work the wildflower. To work the wildflower, I'm going to be going into the 4th stitch below the 2nd stitch on the needles. So here is my 2nd stitch right here, and I want to go into the 4th stitch. So this is 1, 2, 3. That is all of my main color stitches. And then I'm going into this 4th stitch, which is this hole right here. And as indicated by the pattern, it's right above that purl bump. Okay, so that's going to be your best indicator, is you want to go into the stitch that's just above that purl bump. It's the contrast color stitch. And I'm going to be going in there and pulling up a loop. So let me show you one more time how I found that. So not the 1st stitch, but the 2nd stitch on the needle. I count 1, 2, 3, and into that 4th stitch. And when you go into that 4th stitch, be be sure you're only going into the contrast color part. You don't want to accidentally split strands of the main color, which can happen. So just be careful. All right, now I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop just as if I was knitting. Now I am a continental style knitter, but you can also do this if you're a thrower. You'll do it the same way. You just go in and just as you would pull up a loop, that's how you would do it. And then I don't know if you noticed, but I kind of stretched that loop up because it's got to go up 4 rows of stockinette. So I stretch that yarn to match. And it's going to make this elongated strand, which will be a petal of one of my flowers. Now I'm going to knit 2, just as I normally would. And I'm going to go back into that same hole right there, just where I was. And this time I'm going in straight down because it's actually below the stitch on the needle that I'm on right now. So I go into that hole, yarn over and pull up a loop just as if you were knitting that stitch, but you're going to make it a nice long stitch. You might have to kind of wiggle it around because you want that to be a nice long stitch. I knit 2. And now this is the hardest part of the stitch. You need to go back into that hole without dropping stitches off your needles. And it can take a couple of tries, and I definitely recommend patience. But once you do it, and once you get the hang of it, it becomes a lot easier. So I'm going to go into that same hole as the other ones. I yarn over and pull up a loop just as if I'm knitting. And then I lengthen the stitch. So this is what it looks like. And now I'm going to begin working over to my next wildflower. So I'm going to knit 4. All right. Now, because I already have some rows of wildflowers, it's easy to check and be sure that I'm putting them in the right place. So for your first set of wildflowers, you won't have this luxury, but for all of the subsequent rounds, you can do this. So if you look at how these wildflowers finished up, it appears that there are 3 stitches in between. I know we're counting 4 as we're knitting, but you'll see one of those stitches is going to disappear in the next round. So when you have these finished wildflowers, it looks like there are these 3 stitches in between, and we want to go into the hole that's right in the middle. So it's the second stitch on the needle, and I go down 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches into that contrast color stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, make it nice and long. Then I knit 2. I go into the same hole, go in, pull up a loop just as if I'm knitting it, and I knit 2. And then I go into the same hole, going backwards, down into that hole, just where the other strands are, pull up a loop, make it nice and long, and I have the makings of my next wildflower. And you can see that that one appears right between these 2 wildflowers, which is exactly what I want. So let me do this one more time. I'm going to knit 4. And I'm going to go into that stitch. I know it's the second stitch on the needle. The 4th round down, I go into that contrast color stitch. I pull up a loop, knit 2, go into that contrast color stitch and pull up a loop, knit 2, go into that same stitch as the others, pull up a loop, nice long loops, and knit 4. Now this can be a tricky stitch to work. It particularly seems to be tricky if you are a thrower. And so I'm going to give you another way that we can work that stitch. And this uses a crochet hook. So I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of pulling up the loop with my needle, I'm going to pull it up with the crochet hook. It's got that great hook right at the end that just snags the yarn and helps me pull it through. All right, so I'm going to go into, this is the second stitch. Let me show you the second stitch on my left needle, the 1, 2, 3, 4th round down. I'm going to pull up a loop through that hole, and I'm going to place it on my needle. Now, depending on how you pick up the loop and how you twist the yarn and how you position the stitch, that is going to be your personal knitting style. What you want is for it to be laying as if you had just knit that stitch. And so you want the right leg of the loop to be in front, just as if it were a knit stitch. And so that's how I positioned it on the needle. All right, I'm going to knit 2. And now I'm ready to pick up another loop. So my crochet hook goes into that same hole. I pick up the yarn, pull it through, make a nice long loop, and I'm positioning it onto my needle with the right leg in front, just as if it were a knit stitch. I knit 2, and this is that hardest one to make, but not hard at all if you've got this little nifty crochet hook. Just go into that hole, scoop up the yarn, and put it on the needle. All right, my right leg is positioned in front, so that is in the right spot. I'm going to knit to the end of this needle. When I work with double points, I like to put the first half of the stitches onto one needle, and then I split the remaining stitches amongst 2 needles. And that always indicates that this is the beginning of the round, the start of this really long needle. Now you'll see we've just added quite a few stitches to this needle, and there are going to be a lot more on the double points. So just be careful as you're working those so that you don't lose any of those stitches. It may be easier for you to use a long circular for magic loop, 2 circulars, or a 9-inch circular. Though I will tell you that with the 9-inch circular, which is my preference, which is how I knit all of these, it can be a little bit trickier to work this particular stitch, working those dip stitches. I don't have an issue, but if you're new to a 9-inch circular, it may cause some issues. I'm going to work to the end of this round, and then I'll show you how to finish off our wildflowers. All right, so I have completed all of my wildflowers all around the sock, and I'm ready to finish them off. And I'm going to be doing that with a purl round, which is going to involve some purl 2 togethers so that we can decrease any of the stitches that we've already made. So this, for this round, I'm actually beginning right away with a purl 2 together. And the hardest part about this purl 2 together is you have to make sure that you're purling the first stitch with the elongated stitch. And these elongated stitches like to move around because they're longer, and they can. And so I want to be sure that these are the 2 stitches that I'm purling together. The very first stitch on the needle, and then that first elongated stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and go into those 2 stitches. I like to kind of move it around, make sure that they are there are no strands caught, that it's a nice clean hole for me to make my purl. I purl 2 together, purl 1. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I need to do my first stitch on the needle purled together with an elongated stitch. So the elongated stitch is always going to be the second stitch next to it. And you need to make sure that it's in the right spot. So I'm going to work my purl 2 together, purl 1, and here's my final stitch. My stitch that's on the needle, purled together with the elongated stitch, purl 2 together, purl 1, and then I purl 2 more, and I'm ready to work my next purl 2 together. And you can see if I went into the first 2 stitches, this is what it would be. And that would be wrong because this one is not elongated. This is the elongated stitch. So what I find useful is I put it through the first one and then I lift that elongated stitch up and over the stitch that it climbed past. So just be sure that you're purling 2 together, the first stitch plus the elongated stitch. Those are the ones that we're decreasing out. So purl 2 together, purl 1. These came together in the right spot, the right orientation. Purl 2 together, purl 1. Purl 2 together, purl 1. And then I'm working 2 more purls. And I'm going to continue working the rest of this round in pattern. I'm going to go ahead and knit 4 more stockinette rounds, and then I'm going to show you how we do the round 13 because things shift a little bit for that round. Okay, so I'm working on my stockinette rounds of the main color, and I wanted to show you how I carry the yarn that is not being used, so in this case the yellow, up the inside of the sock. And you can't see it very well, but right here, the yarn is trapped along the inside of the sock. And this just keeps it helps me, it helps stop me from pulling the yarn too tight and creating some bunching with this portion. So let me show you how I do it. It's very simple. I've already worked the first round of the main color, and on this particular sock, I like to trap it on the 2nd and 4th rounds of the main color, but that's just me. You can do it however you'd like. So I'm going to go into the first stitch, but before I pick up that red yarn, I'm actually going to cross the yellow yarn over, and then I knit the stitch just as I normally would. And what that does is it traps that yellow behind the red, and that'll help prevent me from pulling the yarn too tightly when I work with the contrast color again. It'll stop it from bunching along here to some extent. But it creates a nice flow for your yarns, and it's a really easy thing to do. So again, I do that on the 2nd and the 4th rounds of the main color because I find those to be the best places to trap for this particular design, but you can use it, you can use that trick wherever it works for you in whatever knit you are working on. So this is the inside of the sock that has already been finished and blocked, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but the yarn is trapped all along here. And the reason it kind of wobbles back and forth is because the beginning of the round changes, which is what I'm about to show you on the sock that we are knitting. Okay, so I'm ready to begin round 13. I've knit 4 rounds of the main color, and I need to knit these wildflowers that will go in between the ones that I've already finished. So in order to do that, I actually would, I need to shift the stitches. So if I have it on my 9-inch circular, I would remove the beginning of the round marker and I'd slip one with yarn and back. But because I'm doing this on double points, I'm actually just going to take this first stitch and I'm going to slip it off with my working needle and slip it onto the double point that's already finished. And that's all I do. I switch, my beginning of the round has shifted, so that stitch now becomes the very last stitch of the round instead of the first stitch. Now keep in mind that if you are doing this on double points or on multiple needles, you're going to have to do that with each stitch at the beginning of each needle because you'll need it for the, in order to work the wildflowers. So that's all there is to that. On round 15, we'll shift those stitches back and be ready to work the repeat. So that is all there is to that. I hope that you enjoy this stitch pattern as much as I do. I'm finding lots of ways to use this stitch pattern, so you'll see it in some of my other designs. And as always, I wish you very happy knitting.